I call the meeting of the Environment and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee to order. A quorum is present. Do we have someone who would move the minutes for January 4th? Representative Fisher looks like he's reading the minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I move the meeting minutes from January 4th.
Representative Fisher moves the minutes for January 4th, 2023. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion prevails. The minutes are approved. I think that's our first vote for the committee,
Nice.
right?
Well, that was easy.
Oh, second vote.
Second.
vote. Second. First minutes. So we have a overview of committee rules, and then we're going to have an overview from the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, and then we have two bills on the agenda. And we know we have a session afterwards. We're going to try to stay tight on the timeline. Vice Chair Jordan is in another committee, so if we do get to the last item, Representative Lee will chair the meeting if we get to that point, and Vice Chair Jordan is not here. So, overview of committee rules. Mr. Drummeyer, I think Ms. Taylor, or
Sure, I can take that. Mr. Chair, the committee rules are fairly standard. They look kind of similar to what other committees have done. The main kind of takeaway is the amendment deadline for regularly scheduled meetings is 1 p.m. the day before the committee hearing. This usually means that we can get the amendment out as timely as possible. Amendments will be posted shortly after that deadline and sent to members' emails and the public committee listserv. And then documents will be posted on the committee website before the meeting. And then any documents we received at the hearing will also be posted after the meeting. And other than that, that's pretty much it.
any questions on the rules? And we're just going over the rules. Any questions on the rules? Hearing none, we will proceed to overview of the Minnesota Board of Water Soil Resources, or Bowser. Director Jaschke and Assistant Director Fish, come forward and state your name for the record. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm John Jaschke, Executive Director with the Board of Water and Soil Resources of Bowser, and with me is Assistant Director Andrea Fish.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Andrea Fish with Bowser.
Proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I thought I'd do is go through, as you requested, an overview. I'll go through this quickly. We'll be back, I know, when we get a chance to go through other bills, including the budget bills, so we'll have more details at that time. And then we want to make sure we cover a couple of things a little bit more in detail towards the end of the presentation. So I will click this up and hopefully have it go. Well, there we go. And Mr. Chair, members, you have a paper copy of the presentation, I think also in your materials. Let's see, slideshow from beginning. Here we go. Okay. So our agency, just a little bit about our mission, is to improve, protect Minnesota's water and soil resources, hence the name. And the way we work towards that mission is through local governments, various local governments and private organizations, and we focus on the private lands of Minnesota. I'll show you a map of that a little bit later. Many of you know Minnesota is a very diverse state, and you'll be hearing that over and over again as this committee hears various bills and talks about different issues. Our agency has a board, hence the name, appointed by the governor. These are members representing local governments, citizens, as well as state agency commissioners. We work with, as I mentioned, local governments as well as combinations of them. We have soil and water conservation districts across Minnesota. We have 45 watershed districts. Of course, there's 87 counties. All of these organizations have statutory authorities to carry out land use programs, water management programs, environmental programs of various sorts. some through our agency, some through other agencies as well. We have the responsibility to create these organizations and/or approve their plans that drive their work. In the case of soil and water conservation districts and watershed districts, and then the counties also have responsibilities that are, in some cases, and in many cases, passed to them from the state in the environmental and natural resources management area. These organizations often can form joint powers organizations, combinations of them or others. Some of those are directed by statute. Some of them they can do on their own for reasons of efficiency or accomplishing more work together. We also work with several and many other agencies, including those you'll be hearing in this committee later on. Several of them are on our board as well: DNR, MPCA, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, and University of Minnesota Extension is also one of our partners on our board. We work with the federal agencies. The USDA has several branches, including Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Farm Service Agency, and others. We also work with the Army Corps of Engineers a great deal on wetland protection in particular. And occasionally we work with the Environmental Protection Agency as well through some of those wetland programs. We also work with agricultural and environmental non-government organizations, both as those that are interested in advocacy and policy, but also some of them are also involved in doing some of the work that the legislature directs through us. And finally, we are also working more than we have in the past in growing that area of relationships with tribal governments, particularly as water issues come and go across boundaries, not only our state boundaries, but across tribal boundaries, as well as, of course, our geopolitical boundaries in Minnesota, and we'll talk about that watershed approach in just a minute. I mentioned, our business model is that most of our work gets done through the local partners, and this graph just shows the proportionality of our budget. And I didn't put a bunch of numbers in here because, each of the funding streams is different, but overall, our funding is directed to local governments, so they do the boots on the ground work to get projects and practices and water management and soil conservation accomplished through their authorities that are bestowed upon them through the legislature, and then through the planning and other requirements that we provide as an agency. This is a map just showing the state of Minnesota, and it's the amount of private land, which is where we focus our work. Of course, there's a lot of public land. We're fortunate to have that in Minnesota. Particularly, most of it is in northern Minnesota. Our state and national forests make up a lot of that, and you'll hear more about that from DNR in particular. They're the ones that manage most of that. Of course, counties also manage chunks of public land as well in that part of the state. But the private lands is where more of our problems are likely to be found in terms of water management, for example. You can see this map shows, it's a few years old now, but it hasn't changed a great deal, but the impairments, and you'll hear about that topic from the MPCA, particularly they assess our waters and they determine whether those waters are meeting standards for swimming and fishing and other uses. And this just shows the maps of the rivers in this case that are impaired, and some of the lakes as well. So we have to work with private landowners to provide additional protection or restoration of these lands to improve these waters that are public waters. We have a number of programs. Some of them are regulatory in nature. We have a wetland protection program, the Wetland Conservation Act. It also has a wetland banking component to it, which has been around for a couple of decades now, and it's really important because we coordinate that work with the federal government so that we have landowners or public sector authorities, including lots of road authorities, who need to get permits to fill a wetland, for example, when they're widening a road for safety. This is something that is prescribed by state law, and we organize that and coordinate it with the federal authorities as well. There's a buffer protection law that was passed in 2015, which is in place, and we also have a role in coordinating the work around drainage systems, public drainage systems, which are mostly in the agricultural parts of the state, to provide the productivity and the reliability for those lands to be able to be farmed in a timely and productive fashion. This is an example of the wetland protection piece. The other one aspect of this highlighted here is that we have the responsibility to mitigate or replace these wetlands that are filled, or in some cases drained, but often more filled for road construction projects that widen roads for safety reasons. And so we do that by, in essence, adding up these small impacts into something larger, and then that bank of impacts is replaced with a site that's got more viability and ecological benefits someplace else, right? Because, making another wetland in a road ditch is probably not the best way to do this, certainly ecologically, and it's often not prudent to do that for traffic control reasons either, right? So this is a way of making sure we do wetland protection in an efficient and effective manner. I mentioned watersheds. Minnesota in 2015, now going on 8 years ago, passed legislation that directed local governments in a voluntary fashion, although we've had every one of them do this thus far. You can see this map shows that we're about 80+% of the way there through this transition from plans that were either organization or county boundary based to a watershed approach. And this was important because the data that we collect on our watersheds and the analysis that's done by MPCA and DNR, Department of Health, others, we are not the ones who do the analysis. Our job is to help get those waters cleaned up or protected. Those are the projects that we're responsible for. But MPCA and DNR and Department of Health have a lot of data that drives the plans then that are highlighting places where we can do something to improve these waters or protect them if they're already in good shape. I'll just throw a few examples in here and, just to give you a sense of this, and we can go into more detail at some point, but here's a public drainage system, a ditch system in northwestern Minnesota. You can see the land is very flat up there, of course, and very productive as well. And you can't always see the things that are doing the job here, but this is a side inlet, and many of these, are in place along these drainage systems to capture the water as it runs off a field and then hold it for a while before it goes into the ditch, which provides a water quality benefit, an ecological benefit, and of course, it also provides a benefit to the field or the land too, because the soil remains on the property and can be used for growing something as opposed to going down the ditch and into the river and into the lake. And so, and it provides a cost benefit to the ditch system too, because they don't have to pay to clean the ditch out because it keeps the soil in place where it needs to be. Here's one in the East Metro, Lake McCarran. Again, these charts you see with these slides show the fact that we're measuring, that we have the science, and now we're also able to predict, through models and other tools, the benefit of these projects that take place. The amount of phosphorus, for example, that's removed from this lake, and also the progress toward the goal of getting it back to being a lake that meets the standard for the water quality parameter that's being measured, in this case, phosphorus. This is one in Crosby, Minnesota, Serpent Lake in Crow Wing County. This lake had not yet become impaired, and maybe, oftentimes it's better to protect the lake or the water from getting impaired, because once you got to deal with the problem, it's harder more costly to solve it. So they did a prevention project, a very large scale one, to collect a bunch of stormwater that was running into the lake, and the trend was negative, but they were able to reverse that trend and keep it from becoming impaired with these preventative and well-planned projects. Here's another one in northwestern Minnesota, in Polk County, I believe. Back in the day, a lot of these streams and creeks were straightened. Some of them actually were straightened and diverted by the government, right? The Army Corps of Engineers was into the business of straightening these things and trying to make the water get off the land faster. Well, they now know that was not prudent because it created, you're just pushing problems downstream, right? And so we've been working for many years now to try and find ways and places to do that remeandering of these channels to provide both the water quality benefit, but also the water quantity benefit. Allows the river to, move the water over a longer path, which slows it down, right, to reduce velocity and reduce downstream volume problems. And you see in this case, this one project, big project, was able to provide, 80% of the progress towards the goal on this particular reach of river. These numbers, to put them in context isn't always easy, but, 637 tons, it's a lot, but, these are big areas too. So I want to just highlight that these systems are restorable. We know what to do and how to do it. The the plans that the local governments adopt are the ones that drive the prioritization of where and how to do these projects. And those are approved by the state, so we have a great deal of science, a great deal of oversight that, you know, comes through that process. But really the most important thing is the partnership to build them and implement them. Here's one, hard to see much here, right? But this is the area over the city of St. James in southwestern Minnesota, or south central, I guess, depending on how you describe it. This is the area where the water infiltrates the aquifer to feed their water supply system, right? And so how you operate the area where the water lands is going to affect how the water is when it gets to that well system. And so here we put a grassland area on top of what was once otherwise, I think in this case it was farmland, at least most of it was. There's also ways to continue farming these areas too by just, you know, providing information and voluntary approaches so that some of the chemicals that are, or fertilizers mostly, are applied at the right time, you know, with the right method. That can also work as well. And here's one in the metro in west metro in Scott County. Again, just, you know, a combination of things here. You know, it's about holding some of the water up higher on the bluff, but also then trying to do more with that floodplain area because, you know, this is a high velocity situation. You can see the banks there. So it's a combination of vegetative restoration, structural measures, engineering type practices, as well as, you know, some natural ones, including wetland restoration. In this case, you know, a lot got done here, but we only got to 20% of the goal, so there's more to do. This is a quote from a county commissioner, and, you know, we're, as I mentioned, down this watershed path, you know, going on 8 years, and, you know, county government, of course, you know, they have their geopolitical boundaries and many authorities and duties and responsibilities to their constituents, but they were leaderful in going down this watershed approach, and I want to acknowledge that because that's something that they took on, and not because of a mandate, but because of a good idea that they supported, and the state enabled them to accomplish this, and we're, as you saw on that map, we're 80% of the way towards this watershed approach being in place. A few things on climate. You'll hear more about this in the weeks ahead in the budget as well. This is not just Bowser Mine, this is many other agencies, including, in the case of the Natural and Working Lands Area and Resilient Communities, the MPCA, the DNR, Department of Health, Department of Agriculture, have all been part of assessing what we can do for our climate. And a lot of these things that we can do are conservation-based, right? So this committee will get to hear more about that. There's an action plan that has been prepared and adopted in mid-September, and you'll get to hear more about that as the weeks unfold. Just a few things that we've been doing, and we expect that, you know, much more of this is going to be needed. You know, soil health practices, you can see here, we've got a cover cropping system on a field. I can show you a lot more pictures too, you know, but this helps hold the water that we're getting in these additional, or these ever-increasing intense rainfall and runoff events, as well as, you know, sequestering carbon in the soil itself. And when this is done right, you know, it actually provides a productivity benefit too to grow the next crop. Holding water on the land is something we've focused on in all those watershed plans, and we'll have some more information on that. We know that peatlands and grasslands that have been altered, and restoring those can be very important for climate benefit. And of course, biodiversity, which you'll hear more about with Representative Tabke's bill, and the legumes piece is one element of that biodiversity, how important that is to sustain all of these systems. The other thing I'll say about climate just briefly is that we are positioned and getting started on how we can bring these federal dollars out of the Inflation Reduction Act that just passed earlier not this year, the previous year, I guess, late in 2022. You can see, don't worry about these acronyms. You're going to hear a lot of them. If you aren't familiar with all of them, we'll make sure we explain them to you when we come back. But in that left-hand column is these are various federal conservation programs. They'll have their own unique aspect, but you can see that the funding levels, these are national funding levels in that current, as of 2022. You can see the amounts there, and you look at the very right-hand column, and those numbers are going up, you know, dramatically. And the way those dollars will get to Minnesota, and these are you know, millions, right? So it'd be billions, I guess, in total. to get those dollars to Minnesota, we need to have some of our own. You're going to hear this theme, you know, not only from us, but from other organizations and agencies and other committees as well. But these dollars are going to be available if we can prepare ourselves to make ready the route that they would take to Minnesota. And they're all a little bit different, and that's going to be the case when you hear from other agencies too. In this case, these are USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service dollars that will come through their programs. There'll be other dollars coming through the Forest Service. There'll be some coming through EPA, et cetera. So you'll be hearing more about that in the weeks and months ahead. But I just wanted to give you a highlight. We'll come back with more details on this later. And you did see there, you know, there's constructional measures and there's these practice dollars too, that, you know, some of them are just, again, doing something over and over every year, and some are building something substantive to do the job for 25 years or more. Two items we want to highlight. I'll highlight the first one, then I'll let Andrea cover the second one, which is along to legumes. We have a program called the Reinvest in Minnesota Reserve Program, which is a program statutorily established to secure conservation easements. It's been very successful. It started out with wetland restorations and has evolved over the years to a number of other types of practices and locations, all centered on, you know, restoring the land and then protecting it with a conservation easement. So that land remains in private ownership and is cared for by the landowner and the subsequent landowners. The state controls how that gets used by the easement itself that the state holds. One of the recent big things we did with this program was called the Minnesota Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or Minnesota CREP, and another acronym. And CREP is actually an acronym derived from another one, which is the Conservation Reserve Program, a CRP, which is a big USDA program that basically pays landowners, farmers with land that has a cropping history to set it aside and put it into grass. Well, we invoked on this partnership with the USDA. We signed an agreement, the USDA secretary and the governor, in 2016, I think we signed that, and it allowed us to take the federal money that was then committed to Minnesota and pair it with our state easement money through the RIM program, and, you know, get something that was paid for about at a ratio of about 2 to 1. You know, the Fed's paying in total about $350 million if the state could come up with this $175 million to do that. And Representative Lee will hear about this already, if he hasn't already, but we have about a $9.9 million remaining amount to seek to at least get to the commitment that we had planned on. One thing that has happened, if you see here at the bottom, you know, we have an agreement that has up to 60,000 acres in it, and we'll probably get to the mid-40s. And the reason for that is since that time in 2016 when the agreement was signed, the land values in agricultural settings have risen quite a bit. So you can only you have to pay the market rates for the easement, which is based on the land values. So we will, you know, that's reality. We just deal with it, right? So that's the one reason I would say we're going to be short of that 60,000 acre target, because we had these land values increase along the way.
Mr. Jaschke?
Yes.
Just to clarify that, so the agreement is for 60,000 acres. So the 9.9 is like a dollar cap, but we could go beyond what has been referred to as the dollar cap to get it up to 60,000 acres. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members, there's actually not a dollar cap. There is an acre cap, as you mentioned. The dollar cap is really just a soft thing that when we began the pursuit of seeking the $175 million to get to the $350 million of feds, we said that's what we're going to seek from you, the legislature, from various sources. And we sought it from the bonding committee, we've sought it from the Outdoor Heritage Fund, the Clean Water Fund, and even the LCCMR funding. So, and we'll show you a graph at some point in a later presentation that shows the proportionality of that. But the bonding piece is the one that, because of bonding, but didn't get passed last year and so forth, we still remain with that component. Yes, if the state had more money, the feds are obligated to continue towards that 60,000 acre goal per that agreement. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, and she'll take on the rest of this. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, hello to the members of the committee. Andrea Fish with Bowser. Pardon me. I am going to just hone in a little bit on our Lawns to Legumes program, and I understand that there is a bill coming before you later today, or not later today, in a few minutes. So it is a good opportunity to talk about this relatively new and really popular program that we have. Lawns to Legumes offers a combination of workshops, coaching, planting guides, and a cost share formula to fund the installation of pollinator-friendly gardens and even pollinator corridors on residential lawns. The program was launched in just 2019 with funding from the Environment and Natural Resource Trust Fund. And that funding has supported 2,252 residential pollinator projects across the state. The major components of this program include just the general public outreach campaign, which I will talk a little bit about later because that is wildly successful. I consider it a great so-called bang for the buck, if you will. We provide a lot of resources for individuals, planting guides, resources for individuals who want to participate in partnership with Metro Blooms and the Blue Thumb program and other local partners all across the state. The individual landowner support part of the program offers a $350 grant to an individual homeowner for installation of pollinator habitat. They're also offered coaches who can coach them in the installation of pollinator habitat and local workshops. Finally, the third component is the demonstration neighborhoods that offer larger grants for a pollinator corridor, particularly in areas where at-risk species have been identified, like the rusty patch bumblebee. We do this as well in partnership with local communities. This also happens to raise awareness about not just the program, but about pollinator habitat in general and how pollinators are doing in the state and can really showcase best practices. We have noticed that there are other pollinator planting projects that do take place in these areas that aren't necessarily a direct part of the program, but are inspired by the program. Couple of maps to show you is just where these awards have gone out. Again, this is a statewide program and we have participation from almost every county in the state, including within the metro area, and focusing in on areas where we can make sure that we're addressing equity concerns, individuals from lower income areas or who might not otherwise feel that they are targeted by state programs to provide grants. So we've had a lot of success in getting this program out to homeowners wherever they've had an interest in it. What it looks like on the ground is any number of things. Of course, it looks like flowers. It looks like pollinator habitat. These can be small little native plant pockets, native pocket plantings, including rain gardens, boulevard plantings, and even lakeshore buffer. Planting of beneficial trees and shrubs that provide pollinator food sources, pollinator lawns, and larger pollinator meadows. For a relatively new program, it has had a lot of success. Our outcomes as of December were 3.5 million total square feet of pollinator habitat created across the state. And that was that 2,252 completed planting projects, including 923 in targeted environmental justice areas. 27 demonstration neighborhoods have been established, and the contributions and matching funds is really close to the initial funding amount, in fact. The applications are very popular. The demand has outweighed the ability and the funding of the program so far. So of the 17,000 applications that we've received for those individual support grants, there are approximately 12,000 that can't proceed without additional funding. And that is the individual support grants. There is, of course, added interest from demonstration neighborhoods and other local partners who want to begin installing pollinator habitat and engaging in this program. We have recruited and trained 148 volunteer coaches, have held 128 pollinator workshops attended by over 5,700 people. We've done 31 public presentations attended by over 2,400 people. And I'm told by our web administrator that our Lawns to Legumes pages, quote, blow all of our other pages out of the water in terms of individuals who are accessing our free resources on pollinator planting guides and engagement in this program. And we wanted to just share a couple of these examples as well. So we have a demonstration neighborhood that was in Carlton County. that ended up with 27 planting projects, 40 total with the combination of neighborhood grants and individual grants. That also inspired additional DIY projects in the area. There were rain garden workshops, information on how to plant gardens to protect the trout streams and help pollinators, and a lot of local level collaboration with that project that we are very grateful for. Another demonstration neighborhood example is in Winona that had 40 different planting projects adding up to almost 8.5 acres of new pollinator habitat. Again, a lot of local partners who have worked with pollinators and pollinating species over the years. This has provided opportunities for workshops and field trips. And happy to report that we documented some sightings of that endangered rusty patched bumblebee as a result of this demonstration neighborhood.
Mr. Chair and members, that's the conclusion of our presentation. Be happy to either take any questions or come back at a later date if you have things you want much more detail on.
Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director and Assistant Director, for the presentation. Can we just go back to the USDA climate conservation funding? I know that one central tenet of the IRA was to focus in on environmental justice and to make investment into environmental justice communities. And so, from your understanding, are there any environmental justice planned with these grants that are going to be running through USDA?
Yeah.
Director Joshi.
Mr. Chair, Representative Lee, the answer is yes, but we don't know how yet because this is still being set up. I just was at a meeting this morning, actually, and yesterday with the state conservationist, and he predicted that we would have more details on those types of things, but not until about June. We will have some idea about how this will work, but exactly where these things will go and what form they will take, it's going to take a little while to figure that out. But that is a component both of their own requirements. These programs are already prescribed by federal Farm Bill policy, and that is a component of those programs already, so I'm sure it'll be covered.
Representative Lee.
Just one quick follow-up, Director. Do you know if the federal agency is taking public comments right now regarding environmental justice and how they're planning to implement that before all the guidance are released?
Mr. Chair, Representative Lee, they had an open comment period that was in December, and there were comments submitted. But here's what I would also say is that we're expecting that some of the details will still be shaped by the state conservationists. That each state will do it differently. So if there is an interest in submitting ideas, Troy Daniel is the state conservationist. I know he would be very receptive to hearing from anyone who has an idea or a concern, either one.
I've got 4 people on the list. Representative Fisher, Representative Finke, Representative Purcell, Representative Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is a quick question. I want to say thank you for the presentation. I'm very excited to hear about the results here in the Lawns to Legumes program. The question I have is I noticed you said 12,000, so almost 2/3 of the applications there was not funding for. What was the approximate dollar amount of those requests? And I know we've got a bill that's going to hit some of this, but was kind of wondering what was that, what was the requirement out there? It gives me an idea of, is the bill meeting it or not?
Director Fish.
Mr. Chair and Representative Fisher, the 12,000 approximate applications, I could run the numbers quick. I know it's a little over $1 million. The grant is a set $350 maximum grant. So that is the current unmet need for that. And the initial round of funding, I believe, was about $2.933 million in 2 phases.
And then,
Representative Fisher.
and then one quick follow-up. I know we've got the limit as what the grants are. One of the things I was wondering going forward is inflation was very high this past year. If we have higher inflation, that's going to erode what that's able to do. Is that something that there may need to be flexibility on that, what that dollar amount is going forward?
Director Fish.
Mr. Chair and Representative, certainly we are open to additional ideas and considerations for those constraints if there's interest from the committee.
Thank you.
Representative Finke.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Thank you both for your presentation. I'm Representative Finke, and just for future conversations, I use she, her pronouns. And I wanted to ask, in the lawns to legumes, you said 923 of those were in environmental justice areas. And just for my own edification, so I could intuit what that means, but can you tell me what that definitionally is?
Director Fish.
Mr. Chair and Representative Finke, I may defer to Director Jaski.
Director Jaschke.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Representative, I need to look this up myself because Metro Blooms and Blue Thumb is our partner that does the data collection on that. So I'll have to get back to you on the definition because we didn't collect that data, but I'm sure it meets the standards that the state is putting forth on all of our grants programs.
Representative Finke.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. I would be very interested in this and other programs that we know are being in these environmental justice areas. If those are specifically defined, I would like to know exactly where they are.
We'll be
Thank you.
happy to do that, Representative. And we also, I want to make sure I do highlight the important role that Metro Blooms and Blue Thumb have played in this because they have systems for both reaching out as well as capturing all this information. You saw these data sets, right? I mean, when you're doing something in $350 increments, you need somebody who's really close to the ground doing this with all these volunteers, which they also recruit and train. So people are providing the service to run this program for free because they're volunteers who are doing this work. And our job is to make sure that those public dollars are well spent for public benefit, right? But they're the ones doing the day-to-day work of reaching out to landowners and training the volunteers who are the coaches to make sure those things are done right the first time.
Representative Purcell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, directors, for your presentation. I'm wondering if you could go into slightly more detail, probably Director Jaschke, about how you work with soil and water conservation districts outside of metro areas, because we know those are our closest partners in the rural parts of the state.
Sure. Mr. Chair and Representative Purcell, so soil and water conservation districts are in every part of the state. They are established going back into the 30s and 40s, and it took a couple of decades, but they're supported by the state. They're supported indirectly by the federal government through Natural Resources Conservation Service. They are supported in a variable fashion by county governments. One of the things that, they're seeking this year, of course, is something really important, which is some reliable state funding to make sure that their work can underpin all of the things that are in our presentation, frankly. Because they do not have, even though they're locally elected officials, they do not have taxing authority, so they are reliant on others for their funding. And so that predictable, sufficient stream of funding is absolutely essential. I know that there were bills considered last year, which I know are in the tax committee being reevaluated again this year, and hopefully those will move along. But yes, they underpin every one of these programs that we talked about today, and we'll give you more detail when we go through our budget as well. So thank you for the question.
Representative Gilman.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question, really quick on matching funds. 27 demonstration neighborhoods that were established, and so that was between $20,000 and $40,000 per project. So that'd be anywhere from $540,000 to over $1 million. Do you have the numbers on that versus residential? The dollars?
Director Jaschke.
Mr. Chair, Representative Gilman, we can get that to you. We can probably get you just more of a complete, numbers breakdown for all of this stuff. The individual applications were $350 in grants to individuals. The neighborhood grants, as you said, were several $1,000s. I'll get you the numbers that are breaking it down piece by piece, if you want to see that. And we can also get you the number of unmet or the demand that's still remaining if you'd like to see that as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. Sorry, thank you, Chair. I think it's helpful because when we start looking at residential versus neighborhood projects, when they get to be, that higher dollar value, and you said they average between $20,000 and $40,000 a piece, that number can vary on how many people are residentially versus,
Mr. Chair, Representative Gilman, yeah, it's a fair point. It's a scale issue. In the case of the neighborhood type grants, you need a and it's mostly a municipal or a local government authority to take on the responsibility to do it at that scale, because often these are done in and around, streets or stormwater ponds, things that the municipalities and others are responsible for. The individual grants are literally to somebody's individual yard, right? So it's a little bit different approach. I think they're both important. The other thing is that we target the location of these in various ways. One of them is to aim it at the places where the rusty patch bumblebee was, previously known to exist, I guess. And so trying to restore some of that specific habitat for that specific species was one of the other goals. So that helped direct where some of the funding went to. So we can get you a much more complete breakdown of this if you'd like to see that. We'll make sure the committee gets it and you can share that with all the members.
Thank you so much.
Representative Jacob and then Representative Heinzman, will be done with questions.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. So you mentioned a couple of times about the One Watershed, One Plan. And my constituents are specifically concerned about actual projects on the ground. So can you give me a number on how much money has been spent statewide? You said you're about 80% of the way to establishing these 1-1 plans. Can you tell me how much money has been spent on administration just to get the plans set up? Because that would be before any dollars have been spent on the ground. You have a number of that.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, we can do that. I would give you an estimate, though. These plans have generally taken about 2 years to put together and about $200,000 per plan. I'll give you just as an off-the-cuff estimate. We'll get you the number plan by plan, but each of them has, kind of averaged about that amount.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you.
Representative Heinzman.
I'll pass, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Jaschke. And just to foreshadow, if you could bring the committee, you mentioned the wetland banking needs, the service areas, and which areas are deficient in money for the current upcoming construction season. If you could get that, that would be great. Thank you. And if you want to stick around in case we need your testimony on the next bill. So the first bill up is House File 207. Representative Tabke, Lawns to Legumes Grant Program funding provided and money appropriated. Representative Tabke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And Representative Lee, do you want to move the bill to get it in front of us?
That is my motion, Mr. Chair. Move House File 207 before the committee.
So Representative Lee moves it, and it would go to the Ways and Means Committee. Is that part of your motion?
That is my motion, Mr. Chair.
Representative Tabke to the bill.
Thank you very much, Chair Hansen and Lead Heisman. I appreciate time to talk about this bill, House File 207. I'm really excited to carry this from previous time. It had been carried by now Senator Morrison, and I think it's a really great bill. I've had a lot of experience working with it through the past and having, I've been denied a Lawns to Legumes grant twice now, so it's a very popular program, as many folks know. So here I just wanted to walk through a couple things. We focused as I walked through past testimony on the bill and where it's been and where it's going into the future is that we obviously rusty patch bumblebee is really important in Minnesota. We need to make sure that we are creating enough that we are creating habitat for it to thrive and move forward. And just before I get too far into this, I have a horticulture degree from Iowa State, and so that's kind of how I get into all the landscape and all the work there. And so Lawns to Legumes is a really great program, as they talked about, has been widely used. And we have major ecosystem collapses in Minnesota of our native birds and our ecosystems, from the caterpillars that the birds eat and going through backyard birds and all through everywhere. So we've got nearly 3 billion birds have been lost in Minnesota since 1970. Forests have lost 1 billion birds. Grassland birds, the population have declined by 53%, which is 720 million birds. And this is anything from pheasants to rose-breasted grosbeaks and just different kinds of things like that across the board that have all been going away. And so lawns and non-native plants that are in our neighborhoods and our developed areas do not provide the habitat necessary for birds and for insects to thrive in those ecosystems. Therefore, they are collapsing. So lawns and non-native plants lack an evolutionary history with the native fauna and support insect communities. And so, for example, black-capped chickadee, a pair of black-capped chickadees require 390 to 570 caterpillars each day for their brood. And so it's a really important piece. And Lawns to Legumes, why I like it, is a really great program that not only allows for people to get involved and to plant native plants in their homes and in their communities, but also a ton of education goes along with it. And a lot of education helps to make sure people know what's going on. And so as I talk to people who have also not, or in my same boat of not having received the grants, a lot of people still move forward with their projects. And so the program is doing a really wonderful job of getting planting of native plants and why they're important in our local areas into the public knowledge. And so it's a very good thing there. So as was discussed, 3.5 million square feet planted, nearly 3,000 completed plantings, and well over 17,000 applications total. So a lot of unmet need across the state of Minnesota where it has been at. And there's a wide what I would define as misconception that a lot of native plantings are ugly or just different kinds of plants that are tossed in landscapes and that. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody knows where this can go and what can happen. So this is from the High Line, so it's everywhere from New York. So this is native plantings, New York on the High Line in New York. This is the Chicago Botanic Gardens. This is right downtown Chicago, but also works really well in neighborhood settings, so suburban areas. And so these are the kinds of plantings that are coming forward using native plants and making sure that we're pulling lawn out so that we are supporting all these caterpillars and different things that can be more formal, like this, still using native plants, which works, and it works in all seasons and is what I consider a very nice thing. So, Mr. Chair, I think we have a few testifiers on the bill as well.
And we have an amendment, I think it's yours.
Oh, yeah, we need to do the amendment. Thank you.
So-
I'm a little rusty, I'm sorry.
We all are a little bit. So I would move the A1 amendment. It's an author's amendment for Representative Tabke to get the bill in the shape he would like. Representative Tabke to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's very simple. It's giving a few tweaks to the program that was requested by Bowser, as well as making sure that we are able to work together with other programs in order to make this the most successful way it could possibly be.
And Director Fish, this is from the agency.
Representative Hansen, yes, we did work with Representative Tabke on making sure that this clarifying language could go in to ensure that we can continue to work with our local partners in order to continue these grants at the individual level.
Any discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. We have testifiers to the bill as amended, and I believe the first up is Dr. Elaine Evans and Dr. Marla Spivak from the University of Minnesota.
Thank you. Hi. Can I sit here? Thank you, Representative Hansen and members. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Marla Spivak, Dr. Marla Spivak at the University of Minnesota. I'm a professor. This is Dr. Elaine Evans, extension educator, and Rusty Patch Bumblebee specialist. So I'll speak very, very briefly, and then Elaine can speak some more. I hope everybody really understands that Minnesota is really leading the nation in our legislative efforts to support pollinators. When I give talks all over the place, I hear about how Minnesota is leading, how other states want to emulate what we're doing, and particularly this lawn to legume program. This program has created lots of high-quality pollinator habitat across Minnesota, and we know that pollinators respond quickly to even small and distributed patches of habitat. And so having lots of them, these habitat patches available, is one of the best ways that we can all help pollinators. And I'll just say that it's not just the flowers for, our bees and other insects, not just the pollen and nectar that helps their nutrition, but the pollen and nectar have plant chemistries that also bolster their immune systems and help them detoxify some pesticides. And this is published research, unfortunately not from my lab, but from others. Additionally, in addition to just the nutritional benefits from these flowers, the flowers are helping other wildlife, birds, they're providing habitat for other wildlife, in particular birds. The root structure in a lot of these native perennial plants is very deep, and so it stabilizes the soil and helps prevent water erosion. So there's so many stacked benefits for even small plantings that I really hope that you continue this program. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Evans.
Dr. Evans, welcome.
Thank you, Representative Hansen, Chair Hansen, and members. So I am Elaine Evans, Extension Educator and Researcher at the University of Minnesota Bee Lab. And I have been working on Rusty Patch Bumblebee conservation. I was working on their conservation for about 10 years before they were actually listed as an endangered species, because we knew that they were in trouble before that. This program where we're able to focus habitat patches where we know the rusty patch bumblebee has occurred recently has really helped to support these goals of recovery. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has established this recovery plan where they need more habitat where we know the rusty patch bumblebee is occurring. This Lawns to Legumes program has been really key in helping to meet some of those goals, to try to recover these populations. So the goal with any listing of an endangered species is to get it delisted. We want these populations to recover to the point where we don't have to have them listed as endangered anymore. Related to that, in the last few years, we've, at the University of Minnesota Bee Lab, along with the Minnesota DNR, we've been doing a lot of information gathering about other pollinators. So the rusty patch bumblebee is one of over 500 different species of bees that we have in Minnesota. And just in the last couple years, we've been able to compile information enough to be able to know about the status of some other pollinators and be able to really say what other priority species could be to focus on. And this is really crucial because with this information, we'll be able to hopefully prevent these other species. If we're getting out ahead of the curve before they're listed as endangered species, we can help support their populations where they are so that we hopefully won't need to have them listed. It will be able to have their populations thriving. As was mentioned with the demonstration gardens down in Winona, we know that pollinators, endangered pollinators even, will respond if they're in the area. They'll use these habitats, and they're very beneficial for helping these populations recover.
Members, any questions? Representative Heinzman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have quite a few questions, actually. So I'm trying to figure out exactly where to start. And I think that it is great that, first of all, I think it's great that we have this opportunity to kind of go through the Lawns to Legumes program and have a discussion. Because on one hand, I hear from Bowser, and I appreciate Dr. Fish, Assistant Director Fish, your position and your thoughts on the Lawns to Legumes program. But there is another side to this that I hope the public has an opportunity to track today, and the discussion might provide that opportunity. It isn't just all butterflies and bees necessarily across the state. There are examples of some challenges that some communities feel the need to highlight, and my own community is one of them. The city of Baxter, for example, has established in their ordinance a rejection of this program. And Baxter, I don't think, is the only one. I think there's a number of others. And before I just lead into questions, I think that I'll highlight a NPR news story, actually, going through its September 27th this last year. And I'll just read a couple of quotes. The program reimburses people after they plant the garden and submits receipts, but only about half of those grant recipients, did the work they were, suggesting that they would do. In the article, is quoting folks as saying, "We were surprised that the initial rate was as low as it was because of the quote-unquote enthusiasm. We thought it would be much higher than it was. And this particular individual, Shaw, isn't sure why so many people didn't follow through with their plantings. Additionally, as the legumes program has moved from a pilot project to phase 2, the completion rate, it has edged up slightly, I guess, but it's still well below the 80% that this Shaw would have liked to have seen. There's a number of other quotes here we might be able to address in questions, Mr. Chair and Representative, but in the end, it kind of boils down to program leaders are trying to encourage grantees to have realistic expectations. Apparently, even those that are well-versed in these plantings are struggling to establish them. So there's another side to this, and the question in my mind is, before we, I guess, just looking at the language here, establish this in statute, it seems that there's a lot of questions in how these plantings are performing and how the public is able to get through that somewhat, I guess, arguably complex, difficult process of establishing these, as well as cities that are seeing a problem in that while the folks that are looking to access those grant dollars are very well intentioned, and as a beekeeper, I certainly appreciate the opportunity for pollinators to benefit from this program. There's on the unfortunate side where the difficulty and some of the challenges there has led to cities rejecting this because instead of lawns to legumes, it was lawns to weeds. And it's unsightly. And so that's why the city of Baxter and others, I think, are challenged. So if we could kind of go through a few of those things, maybe Representative Tabke, I think it would benefit the group and the public to better understand why this approach and why we're continuing to put tax dollars into a program that certainly has its challenges.
Representative Tabke, and then to the testifiers, since there's Representative Tabke.
Yeah, I was going to ask it. Representative Lee Heinzman, are you directing questions to the testifiers? Are you directing it to me, or what would you like? Could I release them so they can go sit down, or what is your?
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we could save all that, I guess, for testifiers, or maybe this is something that you, as the bill author, would like to address. Whatever you're more comfortable with.
Got it. Thank you.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you. Yeah, you bring up a lot of excellent points in there, so I appreciate that for sure. So anytime you are dealing with establishing a native landscape, so there are, it's why one thing that I really appreciate about the program and how it's been set up through Bowser and Metro Blooms and the work that's been done there is that it requires and provides a significant amount of education. And so the program was put together in 2019 when we passed that first, and it takes time to do these types of things. So native plants, as people may or may not know, there are definitely life cycles, and there are ways, correct times to plant things, and there are ways that needs to be done in order to be the most successful. So there are some plants that need to be planted in, we'll say, fall. There are some plants that need to be planted in spring. There are some plants that need to be planted as seeds. And to not get too wonky and ridiculous about the whole thing, there's a lot of education and knowledge that has to go into it. And so that's why in general, a lot of our landscape work moved away from utilizing native plants that support the ecosystems and making sure that we are supporting the rusty patch bumblebee and making sure we're supporting those native Minnesota ecosystems consistently. And so that first year, that was a significant amount of that. There's education, and then there's timing that has to go into getting it done. I thought that article was very odd that it didn't point those pieces out. But then further with that as well is that these are not simple little things that you just take and buy a plant from Home Depot and put it in the ground. It doesn't work that way, and it doesn't, and it shouldn't work that way. People need to learn how to make sure to have this be successful, and some people get into the program and feel that that's overwhelming or daunting, and that's unfortunate, but it is a fact of the matter, and so people need to learn and work together with that and move forward. So I'm really glad that there's so much education around it. When then moving to the city piece of things, there are a lot of communities that just don't understand how this is going. I think that's extraordinarily negative for Baxter and the communities that have made choices like that, but that's their choice as well. It's local control, and as a former mayor, I very much believe in local control where it's a local decision, and they get to choose that. And so the Baxter folks, the great people of Baxter who want to plant native plants don't have access to the program, and I think that's unfortunate and sad, but that's their choice that they're making. And then it leaves more for the pie for folks in Shakopee who want to plant more native plants.
And we've got 2 people on the list, so I want to make sure we're good with time. Dr. Spivak, did you want to answer?
Thank you, Representative Hansen. I'm going to relate a story about my front yard in St. Paul that may help. About 8 years ago, I took out my lawn and put in native habitat, and immediately got citations from the city of St. Paul for my, quote, weed patch that I was growing, and which I realized is it looks aesthetically different than the rest of the lawns in the neighborhood. And so I put up a sign that says pollinator habitat, and then immediately everybody shifted. My neighbors stopped, they looked. Every year they've been coming to see. The birders come and say, please don't chop this down over the winter because we need the seeds for our birds. So at first, it's a cultural and aesthetic shift, but with some signage, which is the education part, people are fascinated. They love my yard now. Thank you.
And just members, in your packet, there is written testimony from the League of Minnesota Cities about their opinion about the program. It is dated July 10th. I think they meant January 10th, 2023, but it was pretty icy out this morning. So, so I would encourage you to take a look at that. Representative Heinzman, follow up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Tabke, I think I understand where you're coming from, but I would disagree in your characterization of cities like Baxter not understanding. I think it's the opposite. I think that it's politicians coming in and saying, we have a really great idea, this is how it's going to go. And I'm glad that they do, as you suggested, is a positive as well, have the opportunity to reject this, because I think that we're missing the point there in that we may not have a full understanding, and I think we're getting a better idea as the discussion unfolds of how there may be challenges across the state as we're implementing this. And it's not necessarily the city of Baxter misunderstanding, but you know, politicians, we mean well, but sometimes implementation isn't quite what we would like. And we're going to, you know, continue to discuss this, and I'm glad we have testifiers here to kind of build on their experiences. But there is another side to the coin, and I'm glad we're getting through that today. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Representative Finke and then Representative Brand.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Thank you, Representative Tabke, for bringing this bill, and to your testifiers as well for your testimony. I wanted to come back to something that was mentioned in the testimony and then is in the areas identified, priority consideration for the areas identified. And I just would like to know how much of the work around the rusty patch bumblebee, how important is it that we cluster these close together versus distributed individually across the state? And is that given consideration in terms of these other matters that are being discussed here? Thank you.
Dr. Evans?
Thank you, Chair Hansen, Representative Finke. The main tool that's used right now for determining those priority areas for the locations for rusty patch bumblebee is information from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is based on recent findings of the rusty patch bumblebee, it's either 5 or 7 years. So there are bees that are in the area. And that's a map that's used for other purposes, but it's really important for this because that, we need to support those populations where we know that where we know that they are. In terms of that clustering, one of the things that's difficult with that map is it's based on what we know about where those bees are. So, they could be in other areas where we don't have them documented. For sure, they're present in areas that aren't on that map because we haven't surveyed every place across their range where they should be. But that being said, it's this prioritization of we know they're there, we know they need help. Let's help them where we know they are, and so that even if it's clustered, the sightings are often clustered in those areas. There can be as social insects, bumblebees can have really big colonies. The rusty patch bumblebee colonies can have up to 1,000 bees even in one colony. They need a lot of resources, so even having them clustered in areas is still something that's helpful. And then as we learn more about where they are, hopefully we'll be able to also spread out to those new geographic areas.
Representative Fickey.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and thank you for that answer. And I would just, like to remind the committee that protecting protected species is a priority that will and should outrank certain other concerns about perhaps preference of beauty. Thank you.
Representative Brand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just kind of curious to know if we have any data about, because we know that these grants are only for about $350. That's the cutoff right now, but we know that people can go further than $350. They can spend $3,000 if they wanted to. Do we have any sense for how much this provides in terms of economic benefit to our state?
Wow.
Maybe Mr.
Ashke
Author?
take that? Or Representative Tabke, one of them?
I do not have that data.
Okay.
Have a seat.
Mr. Chair, members, John Jaski, Bowser. Mr. Chair and Representative Brand, it's a really good question. One of the things that we did learn is that some people actually didn't want the grant. They just wanted the advice because they wanted to do it the right way, without having to go through the administration of a grant, right, for example. There are a number of nurseries and that contribute to this. I'd have to, maybe what we can do is get some more information that from Metro Bloom's, our partner, because they're the ones that actually line up the agreements with the nurseries to provide this stock, because that was one of the other things that was really important, was to get the species grown and ready for this purpose, right? And during COVID, there were some struggles with, supply chain and lots of things, right? This was one of those as well. We have that issue not just in the pollinator area, but also in some of our native plantings that we do in grasslands and wetlands too, at a larger scale. So it's a good question, and if you would give me an opportunity to go back and see if we can find out some more information about that, it would bring it back to the committee.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Tabke.
There's Metro Bloom's also they collect data from folks who haven't gotten any money, as was said, and there's a map that's been created that shows how many more projects have been done as a result of this program.
Okay.
So I've got, Representative Brandt, we're
Thank-
running out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just another quick question I had. How, do you know approximately how much carbon is sequestered as a result of this program?
Director Josh.
Mr. Chair and Representative Brand, we can get you some estimates. There are estimators that, can project the biodiversity benefits of soil health, et cetera. Another thing they'll have to come back with you and others at the committee as we take a look at the numbers we have that on the projects. Now we got to convert that to carbon sequestration or other climate beneficial practice information.
Representative Scrabble.
Thank you, Chairman. I got a couple of 2-3 questions. I too am a mayor, former mayor of Ely. I'm sorry, thank you. I too am a former mayor of Ely, and my first concern was, that's great if I want it, but my neighbor is like immaculate lawn. And is this going to bleed off into them? sort of the same thing that's happening with farmers. Who's going to spray, who's not, how are we going to solve these problems? And we create a problem that's maybe not there now. And the other question, you had a great question, Representative, about the size or the dollar amount. If I have a big yard on Summit Avenue and I want the whole thing converted, obviously it's not $350. You know, it's going to be way higher. And how will that be addressed? And the other thing that first came to my first thought was like, why is this a statute? Why isn't it just kind of run through as a program? Why does it need to be a statute? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Scrava. So this is going through, so it has permanent funding into the state of Minnesota. So it's a predictable way for people to utilize the program and know that it's going to be there. Right now, it's going from year to year, and it is not predictably funded. And so this will put it into a predictable funding so that we can put resources and continue to make sure that we're utilizing the money the best way possible. And to the size of the project wise, it's a cap on the project. So if you have a really big project, it's going to be the same no matter what.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Jacob, quickly.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Hansen. So in my local community, one of the primary ways of managing these plantings was through controlled burns. So obviously in larger areas, rural areas, that's going to be one of the methods used. And in city areas, what's your position? I mean, it definitely made the community very nervous when we started these controlled burns. So what's your position on that? Do you use that, or would people be using that in their local communities and in their neighborhoods and near their next door neighbor?
Director Dash.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative, the burning is subject to other standards, so you can't burn something, you know, if you can't burn something, right? But it is an effective tool, as you maybe indicate, to reestablish vegetation, native vegetation in particular. You know, and it is true also that these things take a while to grow. You know, you don't just lay down sod and have green grass the next day. It can look like nothing is happening for a while, and these species take a couple of years to really come to life, so to speak. And most people are not taking on an entirety of their lawn. They're just doing patches, you know, here and there, right? And that's important because you want to put them in places where they're going to be successful. You got to be careful you don't put them where people are going to drive on it, or there's going to be road salt and things like that that are going to be harmful to those species. So good planning is important in putting in the site in the first place, and really good planning is important to take care of it, whether it's burning or other measures.
Follow-up, this is not limited to just city lawns, right? This, if you have a rural lawn, you might have a larger area. Okay.
Director Jaschke.
Mr. Chair and Representative, it's a statewide program, and we, as we indicated, we have projects in 86 of the 87 counties so far.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Tabke, closing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I know you've got a lot of work to do.
Just wait. Any other testimony? Is there any other testimony? Any other testimony? Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you've got a lot of other work to do, so I just appreciate support for this bill. It does a lot of good across the state of Minnesota.
Representative Lee, are you renewing your motion?
That is my motion, Mr. Chair.
Representative Lee renews his motion to pass House File 207 as amended and be recommended to be re-referred to Ways and Means Committee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
Ayes have it. Motion is adopted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up is House File 206, and that is mine. So, Vice Chair Jordan.
Representative Hansen, would you like to move your bill?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd move House File 206 be recommended to be re-referred, pass and be re-referred to the Ways and Means Committee.
Representative Hansen moves that House File 206 will be recommended to be re-referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Quickly to your bill. Mr. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House File 206 is, I'd mentioned earlier when we were talking about the lands bill, is we're doing catch-up and cleanup. And so last year, the Minnesota legislature did pass an LCCMR bill providing expenditures to the Environmental Trust Fund. The section that's in front of you, neonicotinoid impacts on game species, and the appropriation was in the House version of the LCCMR bill that passed. It had been presented to the LCCMR, went through the process and passed the House, and when we were in conference committee, I was negotiating with Senator Westrom, and this was a provision that the Senate would not accept in the existing bill. So this is the amount. It is not what the project proposers requested when they presented to LCCMR. It is an 11% cut from what they requested. This is a general fund one-time appropriation. You will see in your packet testimony from, or a letter from the LCCMR, Becca Nash, Executive Director, about a little bit about what LCCMR is and what the Environmental Trust Fund is, and what happened with this particular bill. You will also see testimony from Margaret Munson in support of House File 206. I have the project proposers from the Department of Natural Resources here to describe the project. If there are any questions.
Great. Well, are there questions from members? Are you here to answer questions, or do you have testimony?
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Carstensen. I'm with Minnesota DNR, and I'm here to represent the project and answer any questions you might have.
And again, if you look on lines 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, it's somewhat self-explanatory. It appropriates money to the Commissioner of Natural Resources to examine the impacts of neonicotinoid exposure on the reproduction and survival of Minnesota's game species, including deer and prairie chicken. It's a one-time appropriation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will go to Representative Heinzman, but do other members have questions? Yes, Representative Heinzman.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. If DNR is here to answer questions, I guess I'll just go ahead and launch. There is a study that, as I was doing a little prep, getting ready for hearing this bill, that goes through some of the findings of spleens that were, I guess, collected, and I'm hoping that we could get some kind of discussion and find a little bit more about what that looked like. Am I correct? Am I incorrect? It'd be great to have that confirmed.
Thank you, Representative Heinzman. Please remind me of your name, introduce yourself for the tape, and explain the study.
Yeah, Representatives, I'm Michelle Carstensen with Minnesota DNR. I'm the Wildlife Health Program Supervisor in the Wildlife Research Unit. To address the question about the deer spleens, yes, that was part of our work looking at exposure of neonicotinoids in white-tailed deer, and if that was actually occurring. That actually originated based off of a study done in captivity in South Dakota that fed or through water exposed deer to known amounts of imidacloprid, which is one of the main neonics that's used in the majority of these products. And they did find adverse effects in white-tailed deer that were genital deformities, jaw deformities, behavioral differences, and ultimately reduced fawn survival. And that work did catch our attention because we manage white-tailed deer as a resource for the state, and we often, use very important metrics like survival and reproduction in our models of how we set hunting regulations and our harvest goals. So understanding the impacts that these types of pesticides might have on deer could alter how we manage deer. So in 2019, we launched a pilot study to explore whether or not deer in the wild are actually exposed to neonicotinoids, and if we could assess that or pick it up. So we used citizen science, and we asked hunters across the state to submit a spleen sample to the DNR at no cost, and that we would test those spleens for exposure to neonics. And again, this was statewide. We collected 800 samples, and we found 61% of those samples were exposed to neonicotinoids, and a third of those were at levels higher than the threshold that impacted fawn survival in the control study. And interestingly, this exposure was statewide. It was not linked to any ecoregion in Minnesota. It was from Bovey to Houston to Harmony to Lancaster. So that was very surprising. As a follow-up to that, we wrote the proposal that is being discussed today that originally was submitted to LCCMR to move that science a little further and explore whether or not there's actually an impact to deer, because exposure is just one piece of the question, but does it really impact fawn survival or behavioral attributes of the does? And so we wanted to fine-tune where we could launch a deer study. And to do this, we used our first year's data to select a smaller subset of deer permanent areas to focus on. Once again, asked hunters to collect spleens, and we hope to establish more of a control and treatment, an area that had a higher level of deer exposure compared to an area of lower level deer exposure to really assess the impact of neonics. Fall 2021, again, we used citizen science and our hunters and called for spleen samples from 12 deer permanent areas. We collected 500 samples, and 94% of them were positive for exposure to neonics. 2/3 at, again, levels that were higher than the cutoff in the captive study. So what we can conclude is that the exposure was really ubiquitous across Minnesota, and it wasn't really going to be able to set up a clean control treatment type of a study knowing this. So where we're at right now is we have backed up a step, and we are focusing on 2 permanent areas this past fall, 2022, to collect spleens, one in the forest and one in the transition zone. And we are also collecting an additional suite of samples from deer, so 8 different samples, including 4 that you can collect ante-mortem, or while the animal is still alive, so that we could be able to, if it works, we can correlate the ante-mortem samples to the splenic values. We could potentially be able to take a blood sample or a urine sample or a fecal sample from a live deer and be able to then learn more about how that might affect that particular deer's survival, their reproduction, and the survival of their fawn. So our approach has shifted slightly from our proposal originally with the new information that we've learned this last fall.
Representative Heinzman?
Thank you, Chair. So, thank you. The story that I was interested in getting some more feedback to help me understand is this Dan Gunderson story. I think it's August 30th. Believe it was this year. And I looked through, and I did, again, some Googling, try to find more information on this, and I couldn't find the actual study. So I'm wondering if that is available for the committee. It looks like there was a lot of conclusions that were drawn, from that study, but I couldn't find it. And then I also was interested if the study was peer-reviewed.
Ms. Carstensen?
Committee, Representative Heinzman, are you referring to the South Dakota published study or the work that DNR has been occurring over the past 2 falls?
Representative Heinzman?
Thank you, Chair. The study or the data that was, well, the study specifically, that this story has been written, I guess, drawing information from, and maybe it was a South Dakota study, but when I was looking, I couldn't find it, and as you're discussing it, I didn't hear a reference, so I'm just wondering.
Ms. Carstensen?
Representatives, the work that Minnesota DNR has recently conducted over the past 2 falls that I just referenced has not been submitted for publication yet. We're in prep of that right now. So that work will be submitted for peer review. Perhaps Mr. Gunderson was referring to an interview with me or one of the other scientists on our preliminary results, which are available through published internal DNR documents that we can share with you. We publish research summaries each year and other technical reports.
Thank you, Ms. Carstensen. Representative Hansen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Heinzman, if you look at the testimony provided by the Pollinator and Wildlife Coalition, it says testimony for House File 206, you will see a Dr. Jonathan Jenks 2022 effects of neonics on deer and pheasant and other free-ranging mammals. You will also see a Jenks Burham Lundgren scientific report in Nature. You will see assessing neonic exposure in wildlife, deer, in Minnesota. I think that's your preliminary results. So you will see those publications, and I believe the South Dakota information is also available at a peer level. And if Mr. Strohmeyer can publish those or put the links to those published documents, it would be helpful after the committee.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Hansen, to your testifier yourself, is there a way that we could see this study that we're referencing? I'm assuming it's paid for by taxpayers. I'd understand maybe there's a reason why they may not potentially, but I couldn't for the life of me understand why we couldn't see a taxpayer-funded study. Is there a way to get that specifically, the Minnesota study?
Representative Heinzman, we're happy to share the preliminary reports that we have written up on this project to date. The data is also available and has been data practice requests many times since we started collecting this. So there is nothing here that isn't being transparent. We're still in the process of analyzing and writing the results from that, which takes some time prior to submitting to publication. But we're moving forward on that right now.
Representative Heinzman, last question, and then we need to move to other members.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's actually more of a comment. I would like to support what we're doing here. But at the same time, I would hope that we'd have completed data for us to all look at and have in front of us here today, and that just isn't the case. So hopefully in time we'll have more that the committee and others in the public can be able to review for themselves.
Representative Hansen.
Madam Chair, so I think we're mixing two different things here. So we have results from prior studies, and this is a proposal to study more, to look more detailed, to use those results and to find out more information. So we're doing that without a preconceived notion. I'm using we here, but it's not a preconceived notion of what the results will be from this study. These are stunning results that we're hearing. If our deer have that much contamination in them and the impacts, if it's doing those things to the deer, what is it doing to us? And so looking and having the research, this was a response to a request for proposal. The project was vetted by the LCCMR. It was heard last year in committee. It was killed in conference committee, and that's why we're back with this particular science request to find out answers to help all of us in Minnesota and around the country.
Representative Scrabble, quickly, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be. A fascinating subject. I'm happy. I probably have more. I probably have a Representative Hansen. I have a lot of questions that you brought up. One of them, do these neonics, are the subjects that you're testing, are they fawns, are they 1-year-olds, are they 10-point bucks, are they this, are they that, going up and down in that? What was the age of the deer? Do the animals that had the 90% or 2/3%, do they seem injured? Do they seem odd? Are they out? And more so, does it pass through them to us? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Scraba. The deer that I harvested as an 8-point buck seemed healthy. Might not have been wise, but when I took the spleen out of it and sent it in, that it was hunter harvested. Those were the results. So there were hunters that harvested bucks and does, different ages all around the state. And then in the subsequent year, they narrowed the areas for those zones on where they were selected.
Great, thank you. Representative Edelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Hansen, for bringing this bill. This is a great bill because really my question, and you already had said it, is what's the impact on our public health for us? And so it's a great bill, very supportive. Glad that it was vetted through LCCMR. It looks like that it's really kind of gone through it, and we know that there's adverse ecological effects here. The one thing I just have a question on is with the studying that we're doing here, is there a point that it's going to come back and the results would be reported to us with the additional studies? Thank you.
Ms. Karstensen.
Yes, committee. Representative, yes, we would be doing that for sure. The project that is being proposed involves two different species, prairie chickens and deer, and they're in different levels of work right now. Dr. Charlotte Roy, who leads our prairie chicken work, has published already numerous papers on neonicotinoids and prairie chickens, and she's already in progress of field study, and the funds that would be made available with this proposal and this bill would help pay for banked samples that still need to be tested and an additional field season. So it's a combination of the continuation of the deer question and combining that with prairie chicken work. And yes, both of those would be published work and also be made available to the committee.
And Representative Gilman has the last question.
Thank you, Chair. Real quick question. When I just look up the definition of what a spleen does, you know, the proper function of a spleen, do you believe that the deer spleen is actually healthy when you're because it's again, do you know the function of the spleen? And could you share with everyone about that? As we heard the bumblebees, the doctor saying earlier, the job is also to filter out pesticides. Like that's part of the natural function of, that's why they want to bring the bumblebees back and provide habitat for them as well.
Ms. Carstensen, very quickly, please.
Representatives, yes, thank you for the question. As you hinted, filtering, right, is what we're looking to do. And I would have actually predicted the liver might be a better tissue for this, because that's also what the liver does. But in the captive work that I had mentioned earlier, they identified the spleen as the organ that was most best correlated with the imidacloprid dosing. So that was their recommended tissue type. And it would have been a little simpler to try to have hunters find livers than spleens. And some of the hunters here, perhaps Representative Hansen can attest to. It's not the simplest organ to find, but we use that prior knowledge from that work to select the spleen. But as I also mentioned, our ongoing work is looking at different tissue types to give us more opportunity. But it is a filtering organ, and the thought process might have been that it would be passed through and excreted, yet it is still having detectable levels in the spleen. And what does that mean for other tissues, including muscle?
Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to testify for or against this bill? Representative Hansen, closing comments?
So when you're butchering a deer, the spleen looks like a giant cat's tongue. Just for future reference.
Well, with that, Representative Hansen renews his motion that House File 206 be recommended to be re-referred to the Ways and Means Committee. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Nay. The motion prevails. Representative Hansen, closing comments?
I think next week we will be having LCCMR on Tuesday.
Shoot. I apologize.
Motion passed.
We are adjourned.
I was like.